because of my very checkered history and the mistakes that I've made along the way, I ended up with credit card problems in the UK in the 1980s. And because I am an incredibly slow learner, I ended up with credit card problems again for a shorter period in Malaysia in the 1990s. So when it came time to set up my own financial planning shop, it was 2001. It was before regulations really kicked in Malaysia.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Innovating Advice Show. I'm joined by Rajen Devadason, a CFP professional and a Malaysian Securities Commission licensed financial planner. Rajen brings a wealth of knowledge to the show, covering history, global impacts from politics and population growth, the looming retirement crisis in Asia, and why he created a model-neutral financial planning practice. This episode goes beyond just financial services and has something we can all learn from. You're listening to the Innovating Advice Show, and I'm your host, Kate Holmes, bringing you the global pulse on financial services innovation, featuring financial planners, financial advisors, and related professionals from all corners of the globe. Let's dive in. Selamat pagi, Rajen.
Selamat petang, Kate.
So the national language of Malaysia is Malay. So thank you for coming to us from Malaysia today. I know it's early in the morning there. So you said good afternoon because it's afternoon for me. And I said good morning because it's good morning for you.
So selamat is the Malay word for safe or safety. Pagi is morning. Petang is afternoon. So what you said to me was literally safe morning, and I said safe afternoon. So selamat pagi, selamat petang.
Wonderful. I love that inclusion of safety in there and always wishing people good safety no matter what time of day it is.
Cool.
So I have been to Malaysia a few times, but I have only been to Kuala Lumpur. I have indulged in food and shopping and wonderful people, but I do need to get out to the incredible beaches, the rainforests, and you've lived in Malaysia much of your life, but you've also had the pleasure of working all over the world.
I've worked in the UK, I've worked in the US, and I've worked in Singapore, then traveled a little bit as well.
But you always get brought back to Malaysia.
Well, I was born in Malaysia, and what's interesting is I spent 7 years in the UK. This was from 1982 to 1989. That was to do my A-levels, university, and working. And I actually thought that I would end up working long-term outside of Malaysia, but I came home and I ended up staying a very long time.
And I love the tourism tagline for Malaysia. Malaysia, truly Asia.
That's right, yeah. So for those in the US or even other parts of the world who don't know where Malaysia is, we're kind of smack dab in the middle of Southeast Asia. And because ours is a multi-ethnic society, in terms of ethnic breakdown, we've got the Malays, we've got the Chinese, we've got the Indians. And if you think about the region, and you look at the whole world, we're very, very well positioned to reach out to China, to reach out to India, to reach out to Indonesia. So we're a melting pot.
You are. And I love seeing all the culture there and what that does to the food and the people. And as my first guest from Malaysia, I like to learn about and share a few facts from the country. So Malaysia declared independence from the British Empire back in 1957. As you mentioned, it's really nicely positioned, and it's actually made up of two land masses, Peninsular Malaysia and Malaysian Borneo, separated by the South China Sea. It has the largest known cave chamber in the world in the Gunung Mulu National Park on the island of Borneo. Have you been?
What you're talking about would be the Mulu Caves.
Yes.
M-U-L-U, Mulu Caves, yeah. I've never been. I've been told that they can, it's large enough to actually be a 747 hangar.
Oh my goodness.
It's big, yeah.
That is massive.
You seem to know a lot more about Malaysia than I do, so I'm suitably impressed.
Well, I always like learning about places I travel to. It's always good to know some of those facts. And really, you never know when they're going to come handy in a bar trivia. So, for those shoe lovers out there, Jimmy Choo was born in Penang, Malaysia.
Yes, he
And
was.
I know Malaysia has a unique rotating monarchy system in which 9 ethnic Malay state rulers take turn as king for 5
That's right.
years.
That's right.
That's pretty interesting.
It is very cool, yeah. And the king that we have right now, he's from the state of Pahang. I hope I get that right. And he is very, very well respected.
Oh, that's great.
Mm.
So there are about 32 million total people in Malaysia. Can you give us an overview of the financial advice and financial planning market, including consumer awareness and what the majority of business models look like?
Sure. So what actually happened was that in December 1999, FPAM, the Financial Planning Association of Malaysia, was set up. And I remember this because I was involved as a writer even before the FPAM started, because the people who started it were my friends, and I was like the default writer they went to.
Very cool.
And I really think that over the last 2 decades, FPAM has done a commendable job educating Malaysia on financial literacy. But there's a lot more that actually can be done, that needs to be done. I don't know whether you realize this, whether this came up in your research, but Malaysia and Singapore used to be the same country.
Oh, wow.
Malaya received independence in 1957 from Britain. And then as the British Empire was fragmenting, so end of World War II in 45, 1947, India was granted independence. Malaya was granted independence in 57. Then in 1963, as the pullout accelerated, Britain didn't want to leave certain jurisdictions alone and pretty much adrift in this sea of chaos. And so because of that, there was a plan to put together a federation, a fusion based country. And the locales that were invited were Malaya, the state of Sabah in Borneo, the state of Sarawak in Borneo, Brunei in Borneo, and of course, Singapore. And what happened was, my understanding is that the Sultan of Brunei decided that he didn't want to become just one of 10 hereditary monarchies. And he decided to say, well, I'll control my own country. And because
Ah,
Brunei had such large oil reserves, that was a deal that the British said okay to. So finally, when Malaysia was formed, September 16th, 1963, it comprised Malaya, Singapore, Sabah, and Sarawak. Unfortunately, on August 9th, 1965, I remember this because I have a cousin who is Singaporean. He was born on August 8th, 1965. So he was Malaysian for one day. Malaysia ejected Singapore. And so Singapore was pretty much cast adrift, and headed by the legendary Lee Kuan Yew. The people of Singapore pulled together, and they have created something quite remarkable. If you talk about the way Singapore has responded to the coronavirus, the COVID-19 virus, and contrast that with what we see in Hong Kong, you can tell that the leadership in Singapore is remarkable. And Singapore, even though it's only got a population of about 5 million versus Malaysia's 32 million, it's interesting that for many years, the based on GDP, the respective size of the economies are
yeah.
almost identical.
Wow.
So Singaporeans use English widely. In Malaysia, after our race riots of May 1969, things changed dramatically. And there was a rising sense of nationalism, and that resulted in the entrenchment of the Malay language in the Malaysian education system. Now, in terms of unifying Malaysians from all backgrounds, that worked very well. But unfortunately, as often happens, in my opinion, and I cannot speak for all of Malaysia or even for FPAM, but in my opinion, I think some development ideals got derailed, and the quality of the public education system in Malaysia is not as great as it could be. It's okay, but it's not wonderful. And one of the problems that Malaysians have is that because Singapore used to be part of us, because Singapore is right at our doorstep, and because Singapore consistently keeps ranking number one or number two in all kinds of,
Yep.
global contests. One good thing I think about Malaysians is that we're quite capable of laughing at ourselves and recognizing that we have certain shortcomings and we need to work toward that. So, talking about the financial planning profession, the level of sophistication of the average Singapore investor is much, much higher than in Malaysia. But because Malaysia has a population that's about 10% of the US, it's a reasonably big country. We've got 32 million people. We have a full gamut of socioeconomic strata. And as far as the economic models of different financial planning practices go, what we have is vast majority are still very much commission based. And then you can also get practices that are fee and commission based. And then there are also wealthier, more sophisticated Malaysians who understand the value of paying purely for advice and then looking around for products that fit into the overall financial planning blueprint. So that's my understanding of the general landscape in Malaysia.
Well, and I appreciate that background. I do think there's a lot of value in understanding geographic diversity, political history behind things, to understand where people are coming from and why some opportunities and challenges might be different, even when you have countries and cities and regions that are right next to each other. And you mentioned Financial Planning Association of Malaysia, and I just want to give the CEO, Lynette Lee, a shout out for introducing us. So
Good
thank you,
friend of mine,
Lynette.
yes.
Yes. And when we think about financial planning, it's a little bit different in Malaysia in terms of actually being a regulated and licensed activity.
Very much so. My understanding, and I think this is corroborated by a book that came out. It certainly came out of the US. I don't know whether it was published by the FPSB, but it was a long time ago, like in the early 2000s. And what it actually said, or maybe mid 2000s, and there's a line in that book which says that Malaysia was the first country in the world to regulate the term financial planner.
Yep.
So that came as a major shock, because in many ways I'm a jack of all trades, possibly master of none. You'll have to figure out whether I've got any level of expertise. But I've been making money in one way or another from financial planning since 1996. Back then, I was with a magazine, actually based in Singapore, and I was writing about financial planning and getting paid for it. So that's always a good thing.
Always.
Then, when things started to change in Malaysia, and when I realized that being a freelance writer whose income was less than, shall we say, consistent, a good friend of mine who I'd done a lot of writing for, who was of great importance in the establishment of Ep5 in '99. He actually told me point blank, if you're constantly short of cash, you need to be in sales. So there was the writing in financial planning, there was the commission-based sales of product, and then Ep5 itself was birthed. And so I ended up having to do lots of reading and writing. In 2001, my wife and I started our company, RD Wealth Creation. And that was established as a boutique financial planning outfit. Now, because of my very checkered history and the mistakes that I've made along the way, I ended up with credit card problems in the UK in the 1980s. And because I am an incredibly slow learner, I ended up with credit card problems again for a shorter period in Malaysia in the 1990s. So when it came time to set up my own financial planning shop, it was 2001. It was before regulations really kicked in Malaysia. And I think just as things are in the US, even now, anyone can stick up a shingle and say, I'm a financial planner.
Yep.
And caveat emptor actually kicks in. It is the responsibility of the buyer to beware, to go and do the due diligence. And that's why I think the CFP mark is of such great importance to all of us around the world. But 2001, my boutique financial planning practice started, and 2004, Malaysia introduced very, very strict regulations. So, I really don't like change. Most of us don't. But in hindsight, I must say that the regulations that have been put in place, particularly by the Malaysian Securities Commission, which is actually one of two regulators that we have. We've got Bank Negara Malaysia, BNM, Bank Negara Malaysia, and the SC, which is quite closely fashioned after the US's SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. What's interesting is that when I was a journalist for a magazine called Malaysian Business, I broke the story the day that the Securities Commission was launched in March 1993.
Wow.
So I had gotten to know the very first chairman. He's now he's got a title. It's known as Tan Sri Munir Majid, and I had done a personality profile on him when he was a merchant banker. And then when he was handpicked to become the first SC chairman, I put in a request and he was kind enough to let me interview him in his home. And this was a couple of weeks before the March start in 93. So the SC has been good to me. And right now is my primary regulator. If the SC says jump, all we ask is how high. So yes, Malaysia is highly regulated. And if anyone were to call himself a financial planner, it means that he or she must be a licensed financial planner. Now, just because you're a financial intermediary with different licenses for different products, that doesn't mean you can call yourself a financial planner. But remember, I told you that there are two regulators, financial regulators in Malaysia. So Bank Negara has pretty much carved out the space under financial advisor and the Securities Commission under financial planner. So it's a unique situation, and it's something I think that foreigners, when they come to visit, need to pay a little bit of attention to.
Yeah, and I think most people would be surprised to learn that Malaysia was the first place that financial planning is regulated and licensed. And I'm pretty sure the book you're referring to is from Financial Planning Standards Board, the history book. And I will link to that in the notes, because it's a look at the whole history of how financial planning started, of how it's grown around the world. And there's a ton of fascinating information in there. So you'll find that in the show notes below. And you mentioned financial intermediary. I know one of the challenges we have in financial services is all of the different terminology and different things, different words mean different things in different places. So when I hear the term financial intermediary and knowing that it's that person between the product sales and the client, if we get into layman's terms, it's basically a salesperson.
It can be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, because remember I told you about the full gamut of business models for practices. So you could be selling life insurance. You'd need a specific license for that. You could be selling general insurance. You need a different license for that. You could be writing wills. So you need some kind of certification. You got to set up a trust. You probably go to an estate planning company. What would be called mutual funds in the US? The big boys, of course, would be Fidelity and Vanguard. For over here in Malaysia, and I think pretty much everywhere where there's a UK-based system, you'd have what's called unit trusts. And then, yes, you'd have unit trust salesmen. And then because, and this is something I believe we're going to be touching on, there is an issue when it comes to retirement planning and a potential retirement train wreck that all of Asia is hurtling towards. In Malaysia, we launched, I think back in 2012, something called the PRS, the Private Retirement Scheme, which actually has certain inbuilt tax efficiencies embedded, which are there basically to try and encourage people to set money aside for retirement. So yeah, you're right. In general, intermediaries can be product salespeople, but that hopefully doesn't necessarily mean product pushers. And, when you talk about the 6-step financial planning process, when you go through the entire CFP program, what I realized very early on is that for those of us who are trying to memorize those 6 steps for exam purposes, then using the mnemonic EGADIM, EGADIM, is helpful. because it's established the client planner relationship, gather the data, analyze the data, I like to say develop the plans, because there's always a little bit of give and take. Then implement the plan that the client chooses, and then constantly monitor the plan. But what I also discovered, and this happens when you're desperately trying, one, to remember your points when you're standing up and teaching. And the other thing is to actually lock in the key teaching moment with students, is that if you take the word EGADIM and you spell it backward, you actually end up with mid-age, MIDAGE, which is exactly right. That's precisely when people really need to come and look for us financial planners.
No way. I never thought about that. I think you kind of just blew my mind. That's great.
At your service.
So we are going to be diving into the looming retirement crisis in Asia, but I want to make sure that we take some time to learn about you, Rajen, and what your journey into financial planning has been. It's been a winding road.
Yeah. I mean, right now we're doing this recording on the 20th of February. If I hold things together, in 3 months, I turn 56. And for a long time, but right now I'm still 55 and I'm hanging on to that tooth and nail. But when I was growing up, 55 was the standard retirement age in Malaysia.
Wow.
And right now, the official retirement age in Malaysia is 60. I've been told that in certain countries like Australia, you don't actually have a set retirement age because it's deemed to be ageist.
Yep.
So as long as you can do your job, you're permitted to keep it. But the little bit of research that I've done for a particular piece I was writing about different retirement ages around the world suggests that most countries have retirement ages in the 62 to 68 range. Does the US have different ages for men and women? How does it work?
No. So when it comes to Social Security, that's kind of the main place that quote unquote retirement age is determined. When you can get your full Social Security benefits it depends on what year you were born. And that actually changed about a decade ago. So for the longest time, it was 65 years old for everyone. And they're starting to slowly transition it older. But if you want to retire early and take Social Security benefits, you can, but you get dinged. So you lose a pretty large percentage of the benefits. And then if you do proper financial planning, or if it works out for your life and your goals and your anticipated longevity, you can actually hold off on taking your Social Security benefits. And the oldest age you can start is age 70.
70 and a half, you got to start taking withdrawals? Is that something I'm remembering this
the
correctly?
Required minimum distribution. So from your retirement accounts, and that actually just changed as well. So everything is slowly edging a little bit older. Yep.
Correct. Yeah. So on a planetary basis, what we're looking at is that the human race's replacement ratio is actually dropping. For any particular country to be able to maintain its population, every adult woman needs to have 2.1 children, I think. That 0.1 is there for mortality. And so, again, just based on research, when I'm putting together these retirement programs, the world right now has got 7.7 billion people. We've got about 200 countries. And, from a tactical investment perspective, to try and target a reasonable number of that 200 is actually quite difficult. But if you want to get maximum bang for your buck, so to speak, it's useful to actually demographically chunk out the world. So the most populous country in the world is China, 1.4 billion. India, from where my forebears came generations ago, 1.3 billion. The US is third at about maybe 320 million, thereabouts.
Yep, 320, 330.
Yeah. And then comes Indonesia, I think, with about 260 or 270 million people. So it's very, very interesting when you want to talk about the evolution of wealth worldwide, the problems that the world is facing, the specific issues in Malaysia. Everything seems to point to humanity having fewer children And that's eventually going to cause the curve to start to flatten out population wise. But it's not something that we need to worry about. You look significantly younger than I am. So I guess, you may have to worry about this more. But right now, in 2020, we've got 7.7 billion people. The best estimates I've been able to find for the target population in 2050 is either 9.6 or 9.7 billion people. So net, we're looking at about 2 billion more people alive in 2050. So over that 30 years, we still have a buildup of individuals. But what's interesting is that the median age of the whole world right now, I think, is between 28 and 30 years old. But the little bit of reading I've done suggests that by 2050, that median age is going to be 38. So humanity is aging.
Yeah.
Also, the centenarian group, the people above 100. Right now, I think the world has maybe 500,000 people who are over the age of 100. And I think by 2050, the estimates range for 3.8 million to 6 million. So let's say we guess and we assume it'll be 5 million people. That's a tenfold jump in the number of people over the age of 100 at a time when global population is probably going to grow between 20 and 25%. So that alone should cause alarm bells going off. So the responsibility of individuals is to actually take care of themselves. Okay, statistically speaking, you're going to live a long time, but you don't want to be hobbling toward your grave. You want to do the very best you can to remain functional. And I think for those of us who are in the financial planning profession and who happen to own our own shop, where we have control, no one's going to look at us and say, Rajen, you work for my company, you're going to turn 56 soon. 4 years, that's the door. Bye-bye. We might give you a watch, we might not. In contrast, basically, when I look at my family, I've got major longevity risk. So on both sides of the family, there are some people who have crossed 100 and quite a few late 80s and 90 something. So many years ago, I realized that I was, after my extremely long journey, getting from where I was to where I am right now, I love my work. I'm very, very careful about the clients that I take on. I only accept a few new clients per year. And that's because over the years, over the decades, I've realized that getting one toxic client is enough to just really, really mess things up for me. You're nodding, so I think you know exactly what I'm
Yes, I
talking
know
about.
that. I know that firsthand. And that's something I have long encouraged other planners to do. And whether it's something you do on your birthday, on the anniversary of starting your practice, in the new year, whatever it is, at least once a year, sitting down and going through your client list and asking yourself, when the phone rings and I see it's this client, if I don't want to pick up, you need to let them go. Like, that's the easiest test there is.
That may be so. But I came to a similar realization many years ago. And because of that, I've been very, very careful to build with clients that I thoroughly enjoy spending time with. So the truth is, even though my practice is small, I only have maybe about 120 clients, and I only add a few new ones per year. The financial planning message, there's an old 17-word definition of what financial planning is, found on an extremely old version of CFP.net. Financial planning is the process of meeting your life goals through the proper management of your finances. So I memorized that a long time ago. It's stuck in my head. I keep regurgitating it in my workshops, seminars, at conferences where I speak. But I noticed a few years ago that if I were to go to the CFP.net website, you can't find that definition anymore. So I may be the last planetary repository for that simple definition. But that message is valid for every adult of sound mind, not just in Malaysia, not just throughout Asia, but across the world. We are facing major challenges. I was talking about an eventual leveling off of the planetary birth rate. So 2050, we expect to have 9.6, 9.7 billion people if we successfully avert World War III. By 20, by the year 2100, I think we're only looking at about 10.5 billion people. So you can see the aging is going to accelerate. The addition of new people is going to level off.
Yes, but how many robots will we have?
Plenty.
Yeah.
I think over the next 10 to 15 years, hundreds of millions of jobs are just going to disappear like that. What is that term that we see in the news quite often nowadays? Universal Basic Income, UBI.
Yep.
And that's an idea that's being put forward by some billionaires who realize that, you know, in a world where we've got robotics and AI coalescing, a lot of the very worst jobs on the planet are just going to be hived off to the robots and to computers. And that's going to create a huge opportunity for large masses of people who probably are ill-equipped to survive economically, but they do need income. And so I think political systems are going to have to change. Long before the politicians get on the ball, I think the global financial planning community has a major role to play to help people realize that, you know, if at this juncture you are in a conventional job and you hate your job, chances are you're going to live long rather than short. Chances are you're going to have more than a single career. I think for many of us, and especially for the, I'm actually a baby boomer. I'm born 1964, very last year of the boomer wave. After that came Gen X, then Gen Y, and now everyone's talking about Gen Z or Gen Z
Yep.
in Malaysia. The definitions are fluid. I think the kids run between the ages of 5 and maybe 20 or 25. And the very young kids, those that are just being birthed right now, I think they're going to be called Gen Alpha. But you know, Gen X dominates the workforce right now. Gen Z will be coming up soon, and the world that we leave them at the moment doesn't look great. I mean, we've got ecological problems. It, I guess, doesn't help that the most powerful individual on the planet, your president, says global warming isn't real. Out here in Asia, yeah, it's hot or it's flooding. There are massive changes. So there are lots of challenges, but I think the financial planning community has a role to play to actually help our clients and the people that we can reach out to. So I actually try to help people through my writing, through radio interviews that I do quite often, occasional TV slots. So you do what you can as you build your business. There is actually a commitment on my part to allocate about 20% of my time on pro bono work each year. So this involves speaking in for free if they invite me to churches, to schools, to universities, and to just try and get the message out. And the pro bono work also extends to some of the writing.
And is that something you would challenge planners around the world to also undertake?
Maybe not necessarily standing on a platform and speaking. Some people are terrified, some people embrace it. Some people are on platforms and shouldn't be on platforms. You know, it really depends. But I think it is useful for planners around the world to not just focus on the profit imperative, but to also realize that the message that we have, the truth that financial planning is the process of meeting your life goals through the proper management of your finances, is a message that should be perpetuated. And I think all of us, all the CFPs of the world, all the financial planners, regardless of what platform you stand on, in whatever country you're in, we have a message of financial responsibility that I think the world really, really needs to hear.
Absolutely. And you have talked a bit about longevity. And I remember the very first huge financial services conference I went to, and the person opening the conference stood up and was holding that day's Barron's magazine or newspaper. And the cover of it said that the first person born today was going to live to age 120, because we hadn't yet seen that. And that really presents a huge opportunity for financial planning as we look at what the next 10, 20, 50 years look like.
Absolutely. I remember in the 1990s, I wrote a piece along that line. And I remember saying that young kids born in 1998, 1999, there are going to be some of them who live to see the 22nd century. And
Yeah.
that's really wild.
Isn't
Because
it?
I mean, I certainly hope you get there. For me to get there, it'll take quite a miracle.
As long as you're in good health. I mean, I always look at some of these people who are living into their 90s, who are yoga teachers. They're out there even living their best life when they're older than I ever could have imagined when I was a little kid. So as long as you're healthy, you're happy, go for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Oh, I got sidetracked just now, which actually happens quite often with me. But I mentioned to you that I've taken a long time to structure my financial planning practice to get to the point where I love my work. So I am careful about my clients, but my goal, God willing, if I make it that long, is to actually aim to retire at the age of 75. And considering Malaysia's official retirement age is 60, when I share this with Malaysian clients and friends and other financial planners, I very often get weird looks. But if you take time to think about the reality behind longevity risk, and if you love your work, why would you want to stop early?
Yeah.
And quite frankly, everything's going to become more and more expensive even in an environment where negative interest rates are already a reality in Europe, in Japan. I really hope they don't become a reality in the US, because as America rises and falls, so does the rest of the world. And I don't even know how to do basic valuations the moment your discount rate becomes negative. So that's pretty weird.
Let's hope we don't have to find out. So, when we talk
Absolutely.
about the looming retirement crisis in Asia, is part of it due to this forced retirement age? And is that companies still truly saying, okay, you have reached this age, goodbye, good luck, here's your watch?
Yes, and actually, most people don't get a watch. Malaysia has a very, very successful national superannuation fund. It's called EPF, the Employee Provident Fund. I think it may actually be the seventh largest superannuation fund in the world, and it is very, very well run. But the bigger EPF gets, the more difficult it becomes to fund every single percentage point of yield. So Malaysia, like I said, like we've discussed, has 32 million people. We have maybe 15 or 16 million adults, working adults. And EPF actually has about 14 million members, but that doesn't mean all working adults contribute to EPF, because about half of EPF's members are already retired. They just happen to have money still in EPF. And so, in terms of active membership, maybe about 7 million people. The contribution rates are actually very, very good, particularly by US standards, because when you look at your 401ks and your Roth IRAs, there isn't always an employer match, but if you can get a match,
Correct.
it's really great. Yeah, in Malaysia, it's law, and the employer must put in more than the employee puts in. So, for those who don't know, the basic Malaysian currency is the ringgit, and the current exchange rate is roughly 410 to 420 ringgit to $1. So, one of the reasons Americans love coming here is because your dollar really, really stretches. And I think in an environment where Chinese tourists are not going to be coming back for a while because of the COVID-19, let me do a Malaysian plug. Malaysia, truly Asia, absolutely beautiful. Kate, you've been here. Come visit and spend some hard currency. We really need that.
Yes.
So when we talk about the importance of planning for Malaysians who earn less than 5,000 ringgit per month, which is about 1,200 US, which by American standards I think would be really subsistence, because you'd be barely making by with what is it, like $14,000 a year.
Yeah.
For those who are there, and that's the vast majority of Malaysians in the workforce, we have an employer EPF contribution of 11 percentage points, and a company must match with 13 percentage points. So that's 24% of your base salary flowing in. For those who earn more than 5,000 ringgit, I actually can never remember what happens exactly at 5,000, but I'll let the experts work it out. Above 5,000, then the employee pays 11 percentage points. The employer pays 12. So that's 23%. It's still great. And yet, studies that EPF has carried out over the last maybe two or three decades originally suggested that the average Malaysian, now we used to retire at the age of 55, and we would receive our EPF money at 55. A long time ago, the average Malaysian used up all his or her EPF money in 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah. In a similar study conducted maybe a decade later, so maybe 10, 15 years ago, that study suggested that the average EPF member runs out of money. It's getting better because our salaries have gone up to 5 years. But with longevity risk, when you look at what's the average age of Malaysians, what's the expected lifespan, you probably get a number like maybe 78 or 79. But that also takes into account infant mortality and the children that we lose under the age of 5. But from an insurance perspective, when you're actually putting together your mortality tables, statistically, what we find out is that the older you live to, the older you're likely to live to. And if you think about a bell curve, it's really fascinating because if, like me, you get to the age of 55, the probability of my dying at 54 or 53 or 52 is 0. And therefore, the curve resets. It's a smaller population, but it's reset and it pushes out. So the older you live, the older you're statistically likely to live. And EPF does a wonderful job. It is because of EPF that the vast majority of working Malaysians have some money, but it isn't enough. And that's why personal responsibility is so crucial. And the financial planning community needs to continue to pull together to get this message out and to get people to take personal responsibility for their futures. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about the Malaysian government or the US government or the British government. The government is not going to take care of us perfectly. There will always be some level of care. There'll always be some level of a safety net. But personal responsibility, absolutely crucial.
So, does there need to be an increase in knowledge of saving outside the EPF? Are there technological solutions? What would the ideal future look like in your eyes for helping to solve this massive looming retirement crisis throughout Asia and throughout a lot of parts of the world?
Everywhere, I would imagine. A few years ago, with the rise of fintech, the financial planning community was getting kind of freaked out because one of the biggest things that fintech actually does is to disintermediate. So it takes out the middleman. So then you have the manufacturers of the products, you have the consumers, and all of us in the middle, we kind of lose what we call our rice bowl. So that was the fear several years ago. The reality is that to a large extent, many fintechs have failed. And I think it's because not just in not super sophisticated Malaysia, which is actually caught in what's known as a middle income trap, but even in the developed world, people want to deal with people. But then everyone also needs to be cognizant of expenses. As a result of that, I think one of the best things that will actually evolve within the financial planning community worldwide is not a Battlestar Galactica, humans against Cylons tension. What will happen is that you're going to end up with the very best financial planners leveraging off technology to try and reach out to more and more people. See, speaking just for myself, for my quality of life, and I consider maintaining my quality of life and improving it very, very important. My quality of life hinges upon my working with people that I really care about and building a multi-generational practice. Very often, my clients who have worked with me for 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, they come to me and they say, "Will you sit down and help my children?" And I'll give you a really simple example. And this is something that fintech can't work with or work on, but individuals can. You know how our investments generally work on the basis of time horizon, so that the more time we have, the younger investors are, the more risk they can take. Now, that's true. Mathematically, that is correct. But the reality is that if you end up forcing young children to take, or young adults to take excessive risk in the investment space, what happens is with the increased volatility that we have, I mean, it's been a joke in Asia that if Donald Trump wakes up and sends out a tweet that because he got up on the wrong side of the bed, markets could crash. A few weeks later, he can say something and markets start to fly. And that kind of volatility is something that those of us who've been around for a long time now do understand. And the truth of the matter is, if you go to the father of security analysis, Ben Graham, so Warren Buffett's, what we would say called Sifu, his mentor, Ben Graham actually said that in the short run, the market is a voting machine, but in the long run, it's a weighing machine. Yep. And so the financial planning community needs to get this message out to tell people, look, you want to invest over the long haul. The goal of all investing is to eventually beat inflation and taxes so that you don't erode your purchasing power. When we focus on things like that and we just look at the bare metrics, we say, you're young, you should invest. But if you're young and you get burnt, can you imagine how sad it'll be if a 22-year-old gets burnt and loses, I don't know, $10,000 of hard-earned money, and it drops over the span of a year from 10,000, say, down to 6,000 because we go through a crisis. And as a result of that, he or she doesn't stay invested over the next 20 years, 40 years, 60 years. That's a tremendous loss. And so I actually sit down with my younger clients and I actually refuse to let them invest initially. I force them when you get to be my age, it's a lot easier. I literally force them to start with savings portfolios, and they have to prove to me that they have what it takes to set money aside. And it's hilarious when I am dealing with say 3 different children. The parents, mother and father, have been my clients for a long time. 3 different kids, 3 different ages, and I set a challenge. And depending on their financial circumstances, I will say, prove to me that you can invest. Show me, build your savings up to, now this is in ringgit terms, okay? And you got to remember it's approximately 4 ringgit to $1. But I might say to them, you tell me, show me whether you can build a savings portfolio of 10,000 ringgit or 20,000 ringgit or 50,000 ringgit. You set the target, but I'm going to set you some homework. And then give them all kinds of reading to do. And then we have conversations. And what then happens is I think I've basically kicked the can down the road and created longevity for my practice by taking care of the Gen X's and the Gen Y's and talking to the Gen Z's. But far more important than my own profit imperative is the fact that you want to get a message out. You want to try and teach people because this is crucial. Investing is exciting. Financial planning is essential. And even after operating for, it's now 2020, Financial Planning Association of Malaysia was established in December 1999. So we've just crossed 20 years. It's done a remarkable job educating Malaysians, but it's only just beginning. And so I think it's really important for the financial planning community worldwide, particularly in this day and age. You're speaking to me now in Vegas.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. And I'm speaking, I'm not in Kuala Lumpur, I'm in Seramban, which is an hour south. But the community, the CFP community worldwide, within our community, we have the answers for a world that desperately needs to grow in financial literacy. And so, yes, 32 million Malaysians. We have probably 100,000 licensed life insurance and general insurance agents. We have maybe 60,000 unit trust agents. But because of the licensing regime, we only have a few hundred licensed financial planners. So the financial planners in our country, each of us can write our own ticket, because you can only for a normal practice with a single planner, or if you have a large practice with multiple planners, each planner can probably only comfortably deal with 1 to maybe 300 one-on-one clients.
Yep.
Those are numbers that came out of the US a long time ago, and I haven't seen anything that suggests there's been a big change. But far beyond just taking care of the revenue that we need to bring in, controlling our costs, making sure that we are economically viable, our message should go out to the millions and hopefully billions around us.
Yes, I completely agree. And what a testament to you and what you've built at RD Wealth Creation that you do speak to clients across generations. That's something that advisors often struggle with. And especially when they've had clients for decades, having the next generation that maybe doesn't want to work with that planner or doesn't appreciate their business model. And you just took us through doing it in a completely different way. And I really enjoy that.
Well, thank you so much. What I've tried to do is to be what I call model neutral. So obviously, because I have a small client base, it's economically more sensible for me to focus on extremely wealthy, the Hanwis and the ultra Hanwis of the world. But if I do just that, then I think I would be missing an opportunity to help a lot more people. So I actually have a full range of clients, people who have actually literally had to sit down with me, and I've had to help them get out of debt. And I know how to do that because I spent a long time battling with credit card problems myself. All the way up to, some clients, if I ask them, so Mr. So-and-so, are you a billionaire yet? And I actually get blank looks as he or she is trying to work it out. And then one client told me recently, I'm not sure, which tells me a lot. Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely. So there is great value, but I'm model neutral because what I have tried to do is to create for my clients a fee only model where it's pure advisory, time based. I've also done a fee and commission basis. So my company is RD Wealth Creation, but I'm actually a licensed financial planner. The license comes from the Securities Commission. But my principal company is actually Manulife, which is a Canadian company, and most people know it in Malaysia at least as an insurance company, but it also has a big asset management setup. And Manulife in 2013, 2014 bought my previous principal company, Mackle Mutual.
Oh, wow.
And back in 2004, when Malaysia's financial planning regime was being set up, and Malaysia became the first country in the world to control the term financial planner, I merged the financial planning forms that I had created for RD Wealth Creation with what Mackle Mutual had in mind. And we put through the application. And Mackle, in addition to being a unit trust company, was also a financial planning company. And then the Malaysian arm of Manulife, when they bought Mackle for the unit trust business, I think they didn't quite realize they were buying a financial planning company. So that's been pretty cool. But in the broader community, being tied to a single company is something that is generally frowned on because it stands against the whole sweep of history and, opening things up. But it's worked for me because by offering fee only, I have given my clients the opportunity to very simply say, okay, no product. I just give you advice. I will give you overarching advice. I'll tell you what needs to be taken care of for wealth protection, wealth accumulation, wealth distribution. But you go out and talk to different people, but don't commit to anything. Come back and we will spend time together. So that's one part of the business. A much larger part is where people want the same level of advisory, but they also want me to hold their hand and manage at least a part of their portfolio, for which I earn commission income. And because I earn the commissions, I can actually afford to charge a lower hourly rate. So that's known as fee and commission. And then for those clients who come in with a lot of money initially, and they plan to grow it over the next 10 or 20 years, much larger, the commissions are so high, I can bring the fee down to zero. So I explain all of this. I also, on the commission side, I go the second and third mile, and I actually tell my clients very clearly how much the company charges for every single product, how much the company pays me, both in terms of a slice of the front end and a slice of the trailer. And that level of transparency is not exactly the norm in Malaysia. So it served me very well. Nothing really to hide, just to try and help people decide whether they need the help. And for the vast majority of people who choose not to hire me, that's perfectly all right. I still try and point them toward the things I have written or the interviews I've done. Kate, it's been great chatting. I hope we get a chance to chat again.
Yes, Rajen, I have so appreciated it. You have provided such a wealth of knowledge about Malaysia, looking at the environment, beyond out into the rest of Asia. I would love to have you back on. I feel like we have so much more to cover: your business model, your history, ways that you're innovating advice, how you're helping others and encouraging other planners to find their areas and ways of giving back to the profession by pro bono advice or radio or newspaper. So for those that want to connect with you and learn more about you, how can they do that?
Look up my name on LinkedIn and try and connect. There's also a link that I've sent you, I think, which
yes,
is...
and I'll include your LinkedIn profile and the link to your weekly financial column in the New Sunday Times, and I'll include your Twitter link,
Twitter handle, and whatever else. Those should actually help. Yeah, Kate, I really enjoyed myself. I hope we get a chance to chat again. Maybe we tweak the timing next time, so I'm not so bleary-eyed.
Yes, and Rajen, before I let you go, I always end by asking what your favorite food or drink is from your country.
Okay. You've been to Malaysia, so I hope you've had a chance to try satay, skewered meat. Have you done that?
Yes, absolutely.
So my favorite meal, probably, since you're asking me today, answer might be different tomorrow, would be chicken satay dipped in peanut sauce.
Yes.
And then
totally agree.
Favorite drink at the moment, incredibly unhealthy. It's what's called teh tarik. And teh is the Malay word for tea, and tarik literally means stretch. So if you're in a stall where someone's preparing the teh tarik, there are two metal mugs with tea, and the chap will just stretch it out and pour, and that basically aerates the drink. So by the time it comes to you, it's got a nice head of foam.
Oh, how fun. I'll have to try that when I'm there next time.
Well, let me know and let me take you out.
Yes, I would love that. I would love that. Thank you so much again for joining us, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Innovating Advice Show. I would love to hear from you directly about what resonated, what didn't, and what you'd like to hear in future episodes. You can connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram at Innovating Advice, or hop on over to innovatingadvice.com. Till next time.